Hello, I'd like to talk to you today about public records requests, but I need to make that subject interesting. So I'm going to tell you a story about my kids. Any given evening, my kids are sitting in front of a computer. Their schoolwork's all done, and it's too late and it's too dark for them to be outside playing with their friends. So instead, my kids are mining. Now, in the video game Minecraft, players have to mine for raw material, but my kids aren't playing a video game. My kids are data mining. My 13-year-old son is systematically cataloging all of the public universities in the US state by state. He collects contact information, like email addresses, and he sends them over to my 12-year-old daughter. She uses my student email account to send out dozens of public records requests every night to universities across the US. And once she hits send on that email, a legal process begins that can take months of work, hours and hours of tedious work for some poor soul. How do I know? At my university, I am that poor soul that receives public records requests like these. I know all about the tedious hours. So why do I tell you that story? Well, I want to convince you of two things. First, I want to convince you that I'm a human. And people tell stories. That's what people do. So why did I tell that particular story? It's because I want you to know that I have some experience, some extensive experience in both sending and receiving public records requests, the topic I want to speak to you about today. You may even call me an expert. So if I have convinced you of these two things, that I'm a human and I know something about this topic, let me get into what it is really about. A public records request is a way for the people to keep our government transparent. State laws require that public entities hand over documents when they're asked of them. There are some restrictions, but generally, any document of the government's business is fair game for a citizen like you to request and obtain. Some people, they use public records requests to find out how much the government is spending and to whom they're paying. These people want to expose government corruption and government waste. Other people, they want to get gobs and gobs of student email addresses so they can send students advertising for housing or textbooks. But did you also know that court documents are public records? Divorces, bankruptcies. Did you hear about a high-profile celebrity divorce recently? The courts have all of the preposterous details. Were you curious to read the emails between your elected officials and influential company executives? Ask, and you shall receive. Do you ever wonder how reporters get a hold of the text messages between FBI lawyers and extramarital affairs? There's a request for that, too. Or you may be interested in the contracts between universities and international recruiting agents. That's my gig. The purpose of a public records request could be anything, but the means are typically the same. It's a simple tool to solve a particular problem. The request itself is not innovative, but how you use that tool is where true innovation is possible. So now you know what this tool is, let's talk about how you can use it. You need to do a little research first. My kids and I, we came up with this map. It shows all of the states in the US that allow non-residents to send in public records requests. The X'd out states do not allow non-residents to receive their documents. But other states have different laws. Some of them allow the public entities to charge per page of production. So it costs me money to send a public records request. Other states, they don't let their documents being used for commercial purposes. So they require requesters to send in the purpose. What are you going to be using these for? So now you know some of the laws. Let me give you some tips. When my kids and I sit down to do a public records request, we look for the custodian of record. That's the person who has the contracts we want. We're looking for particular contracts. Not everyone is of interest to us. So we do a little research. We find who has it, the specific person for our specific request. Also, we're not looking for all of the contracts a university has, just a small sliver. International recruiting agent contracts, to be specific. So we need to put that in our request. We need to be as specific as possible and narrow as possible. The more narrow the request, the more helpful the response. You may be going out and looking for some government documents. That's great. Make sure you know who has them and ask for those documents specifically. You can be very helpful to people like me if you ask for them specifically. If you're too broad, then it leaves it up to the interpretation of some poor soul like myself to figure out who I need to ask and what you're asking for. And that doesn't really help anybody. Let me give you an example of a public records request. Here, a public records request, remember, is a legal demand to obtain government documents. And in the top, you'll see in this request, I'm a professional. I know the law and I know my rights, and I outline them. And it's important when outlining your request to remember that you are a human and you're communicating with other humans. There are a lot of public records requests that come in, and they have about humanity, as much humanity as a toaster. In fact, a lot of the requests I receive and that we were sending out, you could replicate them almost verbatim with an AI chatbot. We had adopted a legalese style with robotic grace. It was awful. You see, we were sending out these requests alphabetically by state. And by Alaska, I learned that I needed to make a change. After one phone call with the general counsel of Alaska's university system, I knew that the robotic request wouldn't work. So we changed it up. We made our request more salient, and we did our best to convince our audience that we are human. So here's the new request. I start off in the green box. I'm a PhD student. That's humanish, okay? But I'm also still an expert, only the professionals say, pursuant of state law. And here's the new request, not the AI chatbot generated one. It's specific, it's direct, and I even suggest who they should ask for the documents that I want. That's the least I can do as a fellow Earth dweller. And then at the very end, I even suggest if they need to reach out to me to clarify my request, I'm available. I want to know that they understand I'm a human and I get these requests all the time, and I can relate to what they're going through. So there have been many important lessons that I've learned, not just how to edit a public records request to be a little bit more salient. And one of the most important lessons that we've learned in this public records request project is persistence. Maybe you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. He makes famous in that book the 10,000 hour rule. And if you've never heard of the 10,000 hour rule, let me tell you right now. It says that to master anything, you have to spend 10,000 hours practicing and improving at that thing. I cannot tell you that I have 10,000 hours of emailing public records requests, but maybe I'm close. But I can tell you that the persistent pursuit of excellence always pays off. So I want to encourage you that persistence is the most important thing. Inspiration helped on the first try, but inspiration didn't help on the long run. Inspiration set us on a path, but persistence turned an idea into a success. Another quick lesson that I'd like to share with you is one maybe you've never heard of, but it's one we fall into very frequently, and that's the McNamara fallacy. You see, the McNamara fallacy is named after Robert McNamara, who was the U.S. Department of Defense Secretary during part of the Vietnam War. First of all, the last thing you want is a fallacy named after you. The real flaw in the McNamara fallacy is forgetting or ignoring the context of data. Whenever I send a public records request or whenever I receive one, records are being produced by humans for humans. There's a human on either end of that transaction. And if we forget that, if we forget the humanity of data, we'll lose our humanity. If we forget the context of data, we'll lose our expertise. So I want each one of you and all of your communications from here on out, do your best to convince the person on the other end. You're a human like them. You're a person who can understand what they're going through. And also convince them that you know what you're talking about. You're an expert. And if we can do that, if we can convince others that we are human and that we acknowledge they're human, then we can know one another and true meaning can be conveyed. In the words of my favorite band, Thrice, "Oh, you know me. Oh, and I know you. And I know that we can see this through." So from here on out, if it's a text message or an email, whatever it is, make sure you make your communication mean something by considering the human on the other end. Thank you.